What are the specifics in something like the 1619 project that are wrong, and what's the approach about it that you regard as being so flawed?
Let me give you an example. One of the contentions of the 1619 project, probably the most well-known of them, was that the American revolutionaries embarked on this project of a revolution against British authority because they were trying to protect slavery. They had been spooked, so to speak, by a decision handed down in Britain in 1772. This is the Somerset decision from Lord Chief Justice Mansfield, which had declared that there could be no such thing as slavery in the British Isles. Therefore, this one black man who had been brought into England, James Somerset, therefore was rendered free simply by setting foot on British soil. Well, the argument of the 1619 project was that American slave owners looked at this and said, oh, well, that's the British Isles. Oh, they're coming for us next. Therefore, we have to rise and revolt, become an independent nation so that we can protect slavery. It's an argument which is strengthened by the fact that in 1775, when the American colonies move into military confrontation with Great Britain, the royal governor of Virginia, the Earl of Dunmore, solicits slaves in Virginia to run away and to join his royal forces, and he organizes what he calls his Ethiopian Regiment. I don't know if he called it that, but that's what it became known as. And he does enlist a substantial number of fugitive slaves under British colors that way. So this seems to be prima facie evidence that the Americans were fighting on behalf of slavery, to protect their slave property. There are a number of real problems with that. The first is there's hardly any evidence that hardly anybody in the American colonies even noticed the Somerset decision.
And it wouldn't have been binding in America at the time.
And it wouldn't have been binding in America anyway, because Mansfield, when he hands down this decision, this is just in the British Isles. It doesn't have any application to any place else in the British domains. It certainly doesn't have any application in the West Indies, where slavery was much more prevalent and much more deeply entrenched and much more valuable. The exports that Britain drew from its West Indian colonies dwarfed the value of the trade it had with the mainland colonies by a factor of something like 15 to 1. I mean, the West Indian colonies were pure economic gold for Great Britain, but they were also a living hell for the slaves who had to labor there. Which also brings up an interesting point, too. If the American Revolution was something which was created to protect slavery, why didn't the West Indian colonies join with the mainland colonies? Because the West Indian colonies had a whole lot more to lose that way, if that really was the British strategy. Of course, they don't. They decline to have any common purpose with the American rebels. Dunmore is no paladin of British liberty this way. Dunmore will later, after all, be a governor in the West Indies, and there he'll deal in slaves and deal in slavery without the slightest compunction. In other words, what he was doing in 1775 in Virginia was purely opportunistic. And the British Army does this repeatedly during the Revolution. It will publish advertisements suggesting slaves should run away, and when they do, the British just as quickly deal with them in the harshest fashion if they become a logistical liability. In fact, this kind of playing slaves off against their masters is something which not only the British did, but the French and the Spanish did, all through the 18th century. So there was nothing particularly new about this, and it really didn't have much of a purchase. And listen, the truth is that by 1775, the Americans had been in resistance to Great Britain for a decade before, even before the Mansfield decision, even before Dunmore's Ethiopian Regiment.
So these are examples of the 1619 project, basically picking at a couple of things, misrepresenting them or representing them in the light that they were not seen as at the time, and now retrospectively claiming them as the foundational purposes of America. I mean, it's very strange to focus on these things rather than say the Declaration of Independence as being the reasons why America declared independence.
Except for one factor, and that is that the 1619 project has the imprimatur of the New York Times. If the 1619 Project had been published as the effort of some minor newspaper, some small-scale organization, it probably would scarcely have cracked public awareness. But the New York Times is a great American institution. I've written for the New York Times. So it's when you have the New York Times as your mouthpiece, people listen. And that has been a major factor in the kind of influence the 1619 Project has had.